They travel at speeds pushing 200 miles per hour. The very best drivers in the world putting their lives on the line every week. It's time to get the lowdown on this week's contenders, plus a look at the key driver matchups. Right now on Glen Racin.
Welcome into another edition of Glen Racing. We're live from the South Point Hotel, Casino, and Spa here in Las Vegas in the Racin studios. I'm Jeff Motley from Las Vegas Motor Speedway, and I'm joined today by my co-host, longtime Las Vegas sportscaster, and probably one of the true racing aficionados from the early days of racing in Vegas, Ron Futrell. And to let everybody know, Brendan is on vacation in Ireland this weekend, so we have no Brendan this weekend. But Ron, welcome into the show. Second time this year.
What a pleasure. Yeah, Brendan and I did the show together a couple of weeks ago. That was fun. I enjoyed it, so I love being here in the studio talking some racing and motorsports and love the unique and distinct history Vegas has with motorsports. It's sort of fun.
Yeah, you like for the old timers, you become like Manny Mota. You've been the guy, the utility guy that can fill in whenever we need you.
Need me to pinch it. He did well for the Dodgers, and or Ron Kantowski. You can go the other Ron,
and he's done that a couple of times as well. And Ron, you and Ron seem to pick better than Brendan and I do sometimes, anyway. But
I got lucky, I think. However, I did, but. So no, it's fun. It's fun, and I love what's happened with motorsports in this city. I love the I'll say the void that was filled by motorsports in the '90s here, late '90s here in town, when Rebel basketball had pretty much died at that point, and we needed some fun sports to light this town up. And certainly motorsports was right there, jumping in and taking it, and hasn't looked back. So that's been fun.
Well, and we got to talk a little bit about what happened, last week on our NASCAR circuit. We were at Pocono, and Brendan and I talked on the show last week that one of the guys who had incredible value for the bettors that we're talking to was Denny Hamlin, a guy who had great success at Pocono, but he had not had a lot of recent success at Pocono. But Denny Hamlin, I don't know if you could argue whether he had the best car or not last week, because Kyle Busch had a really, really good car, and I think his crew chief, Adam Stevens, is probably kicking himself for some of his strategy, because he tried a different strategy than everybody else, and Kyle ended up making one more pit stop than everybody else. And usually if you make one more pit stop than everybody else, you probably don't win the race. So do you think we're really seeing the emergence of Denny Hamlin, where he is a true championship contender now?
Yes. And back to the Kyle thing, it's interesting. And it wasn't for a penalty with Kyle. Okay, he did lose a race earlier this year where he had to take a speeding penalty. It was just calculations and strategy. And but to answer your question, absolutely. I mean, with the right team, Joe Gibbs finished 1, 2, 3 in that race, driving the right car.
And the best
Toyota.
of the Joe Gibbs cars didn't win.
Good point.
They went 1, 2, 3, and the best car didn't win. Didn't even finish in the top 3.
But it is fun to see you can't call it the emergence of Toyota, because they've been in the business for so long. But I drove my 4Runner here today, and I was thinking about that, to try to adjust the downforce a little bit as coming down on I-15 to see if I get some sort of speed out of it, going around the tight corners the Pocono has, those big 3 corners, and it didn't quite perform the same way. But I do like those Camrys and what they've been able to do with the right crew chief, right driver, and teams now are so critical in racing.
Well, and they've won a couple of championships over the last few years. Kyle Busch won a championship driving a Toyota. Martin Truex Jr. won a championship driving a Toyota. And Denny Hamlin won at Pocono in a Toyota. Denny Hamlin has now won at Daytona this year, which is a restrictor plate type track, even though we're not running restrictor plates, a super speedway, if you will. And guess what? There's one of those in the playoffs at Talladega. He's also won at Texas Motor Speedway, a 1.5-mile track. Now, there's about 5 of those in the playoffs. Now he's got to win at Pocono, another completely different racetrack, not really a similar track to that in the playoffs. But he's also a guy who has proven to be really good on short tracks. He's been very good at places like Richmond, places like Martinsville, and places like Phoenix. And guess what? All 3 of those are in the playoffs. And I think a lot of us talked about, going into the year, that this was probably a Kyle Busch, Kevin Harvick, maybe the 2 of the Penske cars, Logano, Keselowski. I think most everybody looked at it and said, well, that's probably the top 4 guys, and let's see how Truex adjusts into Gibbs. people weren't talking about Denny Hamlin. He's gone from 25-1 to start the season, now down to 15-1 to win the championship. And I think if you're trying to look for value on a guy to win the championship right now, it's kind of hard for me to go against a guy like Denny Hamlin. I think he's the hottest guy out there right now.
No, he is. Racing was sitting in the 4 spot right now in points, and but Joey Logano, look who he's got to beat. Obviously, Joey Logano, very hot right now. He's in the top spot with Kyle Busch right there. So, but you're right. Look for the 11 car and Denny Hamlin to come up there, do some fun things. Yeah, I wouldn't bet against him. Certainly wouldn't bet against him at this point with that team and that car.
Well, and last year we kind of went through a lot of the season, and we said we had a big. We called it a big 3. We had a big 3 last year. We had Harvick, we had Truex, and we had Kyle Busch. This year it's kind of been a big one because Kyle Busch has kind of been dominant all year. We have not seen a lot of dominance at all out of Kevin Harvick. In fact, he's only got 1 win. Struggled a little bit this year. Do we have a big 3? Do we have a big 4? How do you look at it where we are right now?
Good point. Yeah, who would you put in there? I like there's parity here. I mean, as opposed to a time when we can look back when it was an Earnhardt and talking about senior, when it was a Jeff Gordon, when it was a Richard Petty, and you can go back and how these guys dominated a 43-car field, it seemed, week after week after week. But now, and I'm not going to call them good young drivers anymore because that will date me a little bit because they're not that anymore. There are some good young drivers coming up. But these guys are now veteran drivers with top-notch teams, and you can go down the list and put Martin Truex, and you mentioned Harvick in there. I like seeing what Kurt Busch has done this year. That has been fun to me to see. Obviously, it's personal a little bit with Kurt. I did race legend cars for a year, very poorly. And when I say race, it means I went around the track at the same time they were out there.
And Kurt was passing you every third or fourth lap.
I knew exactly what to do. Pull to the right, let him go on the inside, and pass me. And that was easy. I blamed it on weight because I was so much bigger than those guys, but that was probably much. I think it probably had to do with skill more than anything else, but I did enjoy it out there going out on the track and racing. So those guys and their parents, their family, love their story and what they've been able to do and what they brought for motorsports in Vegas and motorsports in general. I know that people don't like them sometimes.
But Kurt has proven though that everywhere he goes, he makes his team better.
Yes,
and honestly, he left Stewart-Haas, and Stewart-Haas is having the worst season they've ever had. And I know he's only one of 4 drivers that was in that camp, but I don't think it can be understated what his expertise. He's a champion. The guy's a champion, and the guy has won almost everything there is to win in the sport. And I think he has raised the level at Chip Ganassi Racing to a level it hasn't been in a long time.
No, absolutely. And it's helped him that he isn't, he's gone solo at times. He's had years where he's gone out there and just sort of done it on his own. Almost.
Well, he was the guy that really went to Furniture Row when nobody knew what Furniture Row was. I think Regan Smith had won a race for them at Darlington, but Kurt really kind of got Furniture Row going in the right direction, and Martin Truex Jr. came in and kind of was in the right spot. But now let's transition from that. So we talked about the guys who are in contention. But we've only got 5 races left before the playoffs start. One guy who is on the outside looking in right now is the only driver who has been in every playoff since the playoffs started, and that's Jimmy Johnson. And this week, they made a bold decision with that team. They replaced his crew chief, Kevin Mindering, who just started this year with Jimmy after Jimmy had spent his entire career with Chad Knaus, replaced him with the 31-year-old engineer at Hendrick Motorsports who had just kind of come back to help the team a few weeks ago named Cliff Daniels. Is this going to be the catalyst that's going to get him into the playoffs, or does this seem like a little bit of desperation?
Yeah, no, I think maybe both. Okay, that it probably is a little. He's sitting in the 17 spot right now with points, but right now he's. I think they're looking. Yeah, the change is sometimes good. You see coaching changes happen mid-season sometimes. Sometimes they work. Sometimes they don't. I think Jimmy Johnson's a good enough driver, certainly, that he can make the most of this. And I'm optimistic for him that he can do it. That he can get this Ford going, and that he can move up into that top. Maybe even top 10 by the time that would be a stretch.
I don't think that's. I think for 15? Him, he is just going to be grasping at straws to get to 16. I think he would be happy to get to 16. I think if you look at the standings right now, certainly Ryan Newman and Clint Boyer are the ones that are closest to the edge. Eric Jones, who has been running really well the last few weeks, I think is getting himself a little bit more solidly into the field. And you probably have maybe Daniel Suarez there who's outside the cut line, who's fairly close with Jimmy. Right. But Ryan Newman has been running well every single week. Clint Boyer has run well. He hasn't had the finishes to show for it, although the last couple of weeks he's run a little bit better. He had to, I think he got a little bit of a crash at New Hampshire with Truex and Kurt. They kind of all got together there. But that's the problem for Jimmy. The two guys that he really has to overcome, one of those two, are two veteran drivers who know how to race, in Clint Boyer and Ryan Newman, who could care less that Jimmy's a 7-time champion, the guy trying to knock in.
He's from California. They don't care about that kid from California.
Yeah, well, and he's just another guy that both of those guys have raced against for 20 years. So there's none of this. They're looking over their shoulder saying, "Oh my goodness, the 48 is right behind us to get into the playoffs." Clint Boyer and Ryan Newman aren't doing that. They're more looking at who's in front of them that they can catch. They could care less who's behind them.
Right. No, good point. And they're veteran drivers that have been there. Eric Jones might be, or William. You look at Eric Jones, William Byron. They might be guys who could perhaps be a little intimidated and saying, "Wait a second, here we've got this guy's coming. What are we doing in the top, close to the top 10? Both of those guys, 12 and 13."
But William Byron is his teammate.
Yeah.
Who's got Chad Canal sitting on his box, and Chad's telling William Byron every day, "You're better than Jimmy.
You're better than Jimmy." And by the way, and Chad would know.
And guess what? William's been outrunning Jimmy all year long.
He has.
So I think for William Byron, when you're sitting there in the shop with Jimmy every day, I don't think that. I mean, he's more of a contemporary now. He's not 7-time champion. He's a teammate. So I don't think he looks at it that way. And Eric Jones is sitting there as a teammate to Kyle Busch, to Denny Hamlin, to Martin Truex Jr., two guys that have won championships. I don't even think those guys would feel any intimidation at all either.
Okay, yeah, and getting advice from those teammates and going, you are this good.
Right.
You do belong here and drive like you belong here.
Right. It might be a little bit different if it was, say, Matt DiBenedetto, for example, or Ryan Preece or Daniel Hemrick, someone who doesn't necessarily have the veterans to rely on and also hasn't necessarily had that mark of success. I mean, right. Eric Jones, the guy's running top 5 every week right now. I mean, he finished second last week. I think it was third the week before that and a third week before that. I'd say the last 3 races, he's probably got the best average finish of anybody out there without going and looking them back up and doing the math. So I love to see some of these young guys like Byron and Eric Jones and an Alex Bowman, seeing some new guys in there who are competing well, who are challenging to win races, who, I mean, a guy like Alex Bowman's already got a win under his belt. He's probably got a chance to get in there and mix it up in the playoffs.
Yeah, he's in the 11th spot right now, and no, he's driving well in the 88 Ford, and it's been fun to watch all of these guys. Seriously, I love the mix now of veterans that are out there on the track that are racing and doing well and performing, and the young guys that are coming up. It's a real good mix to be able to see what's going on, and I think it's a great time for NASCAR. You know, I think it's a fun time for NASCAR to see the performances of some of these guys, and you can't fake this stuff. I mean, you're out there, you're either doing it or you're not, and these guys are doing it, and then the regulars. Kyle, to see what Kyle Busch has done in this sport has been enjoyable as well. To think of everything he's gone through here in Vegas and some of the things he's done has been fun. I don't think we've talked about Kevin Harvick much, by the way. And
there hasn't been a lot to talk about this year. I mean, he won at New Hampshire.
He's just been steady.
He's been steady. He won at New Hampshire. I think he's going to have a hard time in the playoffs because he doesn't have a lot of playoff points. And I think if you don't have a lot of playoff points, I think you're going to be in trouble unless you can pull a couple of wins early on in the playoffs. So we'll see what happens with that. But I think Harvick's the guy that he's probably on the outside looking in terms of when you think about the guys that are going to make it to Homestead, unless he can pull off a win in one of those 3 races right before Homestead. All right, we've hit on Pocono. We've talked about the Jimmy Johnson crew chief change. Starting in the next segment, it's time to turn our attention to Watkins Glen. We'll be right back on Gone Racing.
This is Gone Racing, the weekly NASCAR show that gets you ready for this week's big race and more. You could listen to VSiN on SiriusXM Channel 204. Watch us online at vsin.com and follow us on Twitter at VSiN Live.
didn't catch Racin last week, here's some of what you missed.
How much in the terms of momentum or legs does the 18-game, 16 per player maximum have?
I can't imagine that Tom Brady's going to miss 2 games. I just can't fathom that you have a starting quarterback and you got to rest him for 2 games. And what that would look like is everybody would rest their quarterbacks first 2 weeks of the season and then play the rest of the year. I mean, why I'm not, or maybe rest them in week 17 when the game doesn't matter if you think you can get there. But it's either early or late, but you can't rest them in October or November. There's too much at stake.
So is that shaded a little bit shorter considering there's a lot of smart minds behind the Cornhuskers this year?
Well, let me give all the credit for all this college football stuff to Ed Salmons, our senior college football guy here at the Superbook. And I know Ed and I both really like Nebraska this season. Talk about a team that, as bad as they started, they closed out so well at the end of last year. Mm-hmm. And that's such a mark of a great coach. And Scott Frost did such a great job with Central Florida, and he really had that team turned around by the end of last season. I don't see any reason why Nebraska won't win the Big Ten. I think it's called the Big Ten West.
You know, you got Zeke. You can't get into a 7-man box down there because they'll run it down your throat. So obviously, you know, it's got to come off the passing game or some other way. Do they have an answer for it down there?
Yeah, Michael, they really, they really struggled, as you mentioned, with that. Some great numbers that you just threw out there. And, you know, you're absolutely right. They missed a really point of attack blocker. You know, their tight end, they used to have a combination, even old man Jason Witten and then, you know, James Hanna. When they had James Hanna, and then James Hanna retired, you know, James Hanna was kind of a stunt man. He's like, okay, you know, they take the actor out, they put the stunt man in, and, you know, he does all the dirty work. And they missed a guy like that. They didn't have that ability to really control the point of attack.
I mean, what was your low? How bummed were you at that moment? Were you just super dejected, or were you okay with it?
You know, it's a funny story. So when right after the taping finished, and I kind of had to go sign my forms to collect my second place money, one of the producers came up to me and she gave me a hug, and she actually started crying because she said she had never seen anyone play the game so beautifully before, and I had to like kind of pat her on the back and comfort her.
That's amazing.
The experience was ending.
Wow.
But you know, I mean, I would say like it was kind of a bittersweet moment. Obviously, I wasn't happy to lose, but at the same time, you know, it was getting a little stressful going back there every week, and you know, I was kind of like I had put this achievement, checked it off the bucket list.
Defensively, this is a good football team. And Fangio will make them. They'll create some turnovers with his pressure and his way to, you know, you got Von Miller on one side and Bradley Chubb on the other. You know, that's going to be, and then you're playing an altitude up there. Look, they're 6-10 last year, and you and I watched it repeatedly at the Oceans, right? How many games did Vance Joseph mess up for him?
Yep, I would say off the top of my head 5.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's like we sat there and like, what are you doing? You know, and I think if they just don't lose games. You know, Belichick talks about this all the time. We have to avoid losing before we can win. And I thought last year Denver lost games more than any.
Welcome back to our weekly NASCAR show, live from the Sportsbook at the South Point Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. Now, back to Gone Racing.
Welcome back into another edition of Gone Racing. I'm Jeff Motley, alongside our guest co-host Ron Futrell. Brendan Gone is on vacation this week. And Ron, we've just kind of wrapped up Pocono. We talked a little bit about the Jimmy Johnson crew chief. Now we're turning our attention to the second road course race of the year at Watkins Glen International. I think most people in the NASCAR world now look at our 3 road courses, since we have the Roval at Charlotte, as 3 very distinctively different racetracks. We've seen guys who've had some measures of success not necessarily have that at Watkins Glen, and vice versa. One guy, though, who seems to have really figured out the whole road course deal is Martin Truex Jr., a winner at Sonoma earlier this year. He was the winner in 2017 at Watkins Glen, and last year he was hounding Chase Elliott all the way up to the very end, and he ran out of gas with half a lap to go, and Chase Elliott was able to pull away, and I'm not so sure Chase Elliott would have won that race if Martin Truex Jr. had not run out of gas. So is this Martin Truex Jr.'s race and everybody else is chasing him this week?
Oh, absolutely. On the road courses, it's fun to watch what he can do. And I do like the road courses. I know the NASCAR purists will sit there and shake their head at it a little bit, but it's interesting. You take a guy like Brad Keselowski, who races so well at Watkins Glen, but can't figure out Sonoma, and you wonder sometimes why. I don't know it. I don't know well enough to figure out why he has that disconnect. But he's a guy you got to look at this week. He didn't perform well. Joey Logano, great on road courses, had a horrible time at Sonoma this year, finished 23rd. But on road courses, Joey Logano performs and does the job typically very well. And we're sort of, would you say, Jeff, we're sort of past the day of the specialty drivers? I'm looking for Juan Pablo Montoya and trying to get him out there to drive, the specialty guys that come in just to race sometimes on road courses.
I would agree with you that we probably aren't. We see that still somewhat in the Xfinity series. I mean, you may see a Borisset or Ron Fellows, or you might even see some of the guys who used to live here, like a Patrick Carpentier or Alex Tagliani or somebody potentially running an Xfinity Series race, maybe hop into a truck. We don't see that as much in the Cup Series. But one thing that we have seen, though, at Watkins Glen are people who have road course backgrounds have been successful at Watkins Glen where they have not been that successful at Sonoma. I mean, just over the last 10 years, 10 races at Watkins Glen, Juan Pablo Montoya has a win there. A.J. Allmendinger has his only career win there. Marcus Ambrose, his only 2 career wins, came at Watkins Glen. Incidentally, there are only 6 drivers that will be in the field this weekend that have wins at Watkins Glen. Now, I don't think you could probably find that on very many racetracks. I mean, the last 4 years, we've had Chase Elliott get a win there.
Right.
We've had Martin Truex Jr. get a win there. We've had Denny Hamlin. We've had Joey Logano.
The number's that low. That it's that low.
Correct. It's a very low number.
You're right.
So now the last 4 years, we've had 4 different winners. Like I said, in Hamlin, Logano, Truex, and Chase Elliott. Kevin Harvick and Kyle Busch are the only other 2 guys that will be in the field on Sunday who have ever won at Watkins Glen. I mean, you start looking at guys like Kurt Busch, Brad Keselowski. I mean, there's guys that have not won at Watkins Glen. And I think it's a very challenging road course. They only go there once a year. And some people like to say that Sonoma is a super speedway that turns left and right because there are so many high speed areas of Sonoma. Well, with the bus stop they put in at Watkins Glen, they really don't have the high speed areas at Watkins Glen. As soon as you get up to any kind of a speed, you're making a turn. Whereas at Sonoma, you can carry a lot of speed up the hill. You carry a ton of speed down the hill. Now that they put the carousel in, that has probably taken out a little bit of the speed from Sonoma, but it's probably made it a little bit more of a challenging course. And we look in this weekend, and Martin Truex Jr. is 7-2. He's not the favorite. Kyle Busch is the favorite, and he's at 5-2. So I'm actually a little bit surprised. I think the bettors just want to jump on Kyle Busch, and it's hard not to make him the favorite. But Kyle Busch hasn't won at Watkins Glen since 2013. So that's been 6 years since he last won there. I think Martin Truex Jr. is a guy that if I were looking at somebody to put a bet on with him not being the favorite, I think he'd be a really good choice.
Okay, well, I'm going to go. I know we're not making picks right now, but I'm throwing Joey Logano out there because and part of it's because of his horrible performance at Sonoma. He finished 23rd at Sonoma. He was way back in the pack and just couldn't. I don't know what. I'm not sure. I can't recall what the issues were. Whether his car wasn't performing or he just got back there and couldn't pass anybody. But at the same time, I think he's as good as he is on road course. He's won at Watkins Glen before, so he's able to do that. I think 2015, 2016, right around there.
Right.
He won there. So and he by the way, there's value there at 12-1 to say Joey Logano is going to come out on the guy's leading in points right now overall. Very good. Another guy who's very good on the road courses, and he's going to come out strong in this race to prove something because of the miserable performance he had at Sonoma.
Well, let's take a look at some of the odds that we've got right now. I mean, obviously, we mentioned Kyle Busch, the favorite at 5-2, and Martin Truex Jr. at 7-2. But we've got some guys who are former winners here. Denny Hamlin, maybe the hottest guy on the circuit right now at 10-1. Last year's winner, Chase Elliott, comes in at 10-1. And then we've got Kevin Harvick and Joey Logano and Brad Keselowski, all 3 at 12-1. I cannot remember seeing numbers that were this big on some of the top competitors. And Kurt Busch, who is an underrated road course racer, he's 16-1. And there's a guy down here at 30-1, Daniel Suarez. Now, Daniel Suarez has only raced at Watkins Glen in the Cup Series twice. How many top 5 finishes do you think Daniel Suarez has at Watkins Glen?
Has he been in
2?
He's 2
He's
for 2.
Finished third. He's finished 3rd and 4th in his 2 races at Watkins Glen. He's obviously very comfortable on that racetrack, and he is 30-1. So I think this week, and I think Brendan would agree if he were here, the odds to actually win the race has got incredible value this week, more so than I think we've seen in some previous weeks.
And partly because it's a wild card, because the road, and that's one of the enjoyable things about the road courses, is that it's a bit of a wild card in that so many things can happen to you. Mechanicals, perhaps not as often, but certainly you don't qualify well, you're done. You don't qualify well, forget about it. You're back in the field. It's going to be very difficult for you to move up through the field on a road course to be able to do something. So look at the guys. I know we've got to pick before qualifying, which is one of the
a little harder for us.
Things,
we talk about that.
But I'd like to see those qualifying numbers of where they're at on the track.
And we always encourage bettors to wait until qualifying is over and inspection is over on Sunday morning before placing your wager in there. So even though we're just giving you guidance here, we always recommend you wait until Sunday morning before you put your bets down. Now, the other thing, and Brendan and I love this, we love to talk about the top 3. The top 3 finish. DraftKings does that for the race at Watkins Glen. Kyle Busch is overwhelming at minus 134, but you get Martin Truex Jr. on a plus line there at plus 125. But I like looking down at some of the other numbers and the lower numbers down there. I mean, we've talked about Daniel Suarez. He's at a plus 500 to finish in the top 3, and he's finished 3rd and 4th in his 2 races there. Eric Jones has finished in the top 3 consecutive weeks. Now, granted, none of those were road courses, but he's done it on different type racetracks, whether he was at Kentucky or at New Hampshire or Pocono.
You don't
three distinctly different racetracks, and some people will tell you Pocono is kind of like a road course that you don't turn right on. And so Eric Jones coming in there at plus 600, and a guy who has been really good at Watkins Glen throughout his career, Kyle Larson, who you can't really tell what you're going to get with Kyle Larson from week to week. It's like one week he looks like he's going to be the Kyle Larson of old, and he's back and he's ready to win races, and then all of a sudden he has a race where he just has a complete nightmare. Like last week, he had a nightmare before the race started. He had to start at the rear of the field because he had to go to a backup car, but he raced his way all the way up, and he was 4th on the final restart with a chance to challenge for the win. So seeing Kyle Larson there at plus 750, I think there's some pretty good value on some of these top 3 picks.
I wouldn't do Jimmy Johnson at 10-1. What is his deal with road courses? It just seems like well,
there was a time where he was good at Sonoma, but he's another guy. I mean, Jimmy Johnson will win at Watkins Glen. I mean, it can't be many places he hasn't won at.
Right. And that's so I don't see him now. As we mentioned before, we do see him coming up in the points throughout the season, but this is not. I don't see this as the week for him to be able to do it. Kurt and Kyle are both very good at road courses, and you mentioned Kyle at minus money to finish at 134. Kurt Busch plus 400 to finish there. He's been very good solid on road courses, certainly. But I do like. I hadn't realized Daniel Suarez. So you mentioned that the Daniel Suarez back two races at Watkins Glen and finishing the top number 3 and number 4, and he right now is at plus 500 to finish in the top.
And he's a guy who's on the outside looking in for the playoffs right now, and this is kind of a wild card race. If Daniel Suarez were to pick up his first career win by chance, then that really puts Jimmy Johnson in big trouble and probably puts Ryan Newman or Clint Boyer one squarely on the bubble and holding their breath with 4 races to go.
Good point. Yeah, he's in the 18 spot right now in point standings with Jimmy Johnson in the 17, as we had mentioned earlier. So, no, if he comes out, if he comes out, this has got to be his week. This is a big week for that team, that driver, to say we perform, and by the way, we might just play ourselves. They get a win here, or finish in the top 5. They might have played their way into the playoffs.
Absolutely. Well, if they get a win, they're in the playoffs for sure. And you're right. If he can get a top 3, top 5, I think there's a great opportunity there. When we come back on Gone Racing, Ron and I are going to dive more into the actual head-to-head driver matchups and get into one of the things that we really enjoy, the group matchups, when we return on Gone Racing.
This is Gone Racing, the weekly NASCAR show that gets you ready for this week's big race and more. You can listen to VSiN on SiriusXM Channel 204. Watch us online at vsin.com and follow us on Twitter at VSiN Live.
If you didn't catch VSiN last week, here's some of what you missed.
Defensively, this is a good football team, and Fangio will make them. They'll create some turnovers with his pressure and his way to, you got Von Miller on one side and Bradley Chubb on the other. That's going to be, and then you're playing an altitude up there. Look, they're 6-10 last year, and you and I watched it repeatedly at the Oceans, right? How many games did Vance Joseph mess up for him?
Yep, I would say off the top of my head 5.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we sat there and like, what are you doing? And I think if they just don't lose games, there's Belichick talks about this all the time. We have to avoid losing before we can win.
So children's books, because they cover a wide variety of subjects in a succinct manner. That was sort of your hack on that. You also, there's a lot of literature, for instance, that is asked about on Jeopardy. You're not reading entire books. What was your sort of shortcut for that?
There's a lot of material out there for everything. They have these people who they draw up like an animated summary of a Shakespeare play that boils down into a 7-minute video you can watch on YouTube. If you're able to process that and you don't want to actually read the Shakespeare play like me, then most of the nuts and bolts of what Hamlet is about are on there.
How much in terms of momentum or legs does the 18-game, 16 per player maximum have?
I can't imagine that Tom Brady's going to miss 2 games. I just can't fathom that you have a starting quarterback and you got to rest him for 2 games. And what that would look like is everybody would rest their quarterbacks first 2 weeks of the season and then play the rest of the year. I mean, why I'm not, or maybe rest them in week 17 when the game doesn't matter if you think you can get there. But it's either early or late, but you can't rest them in October or November. There's too much at stake. You got Zeke. You can't get into a 7-man box down there because they'll run it down your throat. So obviously, it's got to come off the passing game or some other way. Do they have an answer for it down there?
Yeah, Michael, they really, they really struggled, as you mentioned, with that. Some great numbers that you just threw out there. And, you're absolutely right. They missed a really point of attack blocker. Their tight end, they used to have a combination, even old man Jason Witten, and then, James Hanna. When they had James Hanna, and then James Hanna retired, James Hanna was kind of a stunt man. He's like, okay, they take the actor out, they put the stunt man in, and, he does all the dirty work. And they missed a guy like that. They didn't have that ability to really control the point of attack.
Welcome back to our weekly NASCAR show, live from the Sportsbook at the South Point Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. Now, back to Gone Racing.
Welcome back into Gone Racing. I'm Jeff Motley, alongside my guest host this week, Ron Futrell. Our regular co-host, Brendan Gaughan, is enjoying a week-long summer vacation on the Irish coast, so I hope he's having fun over there. Ron, we've been talking Watkins Glen. Now we're going to move into the driver head-to-head matchups. I look out there, and I think we got a couple of really good ones. I'm not really high on some of the driver matchups. Right there off the very top, though, Martin Truex Jr., a guy who he's won at Sonoma this year. He won at Watkins Glen in 2017. He finished second in 18. Probably would have run the race if he doesn't run out of gas. He's getting plus money against Kyle Busch at minus 135, a plus 115. Some of the other picks out there, Chase Elliott, defending champion. He's a minus 120 against Clint Boyer. And a few of the other matchups are really kind of a even head up. Kurt Busch is getting a little bit of love against Joey Logano there. He's a plus 110. To Joey's minus 130. Anything jump out to you on that first page, those top 9?
Kurt Busch, Brad Keselowski. As much as I talked about Kurt Busch there, but I do like Keselowski's performances on at Watkins Glen in particular, how good he is on that. He's minus 130, so you got to give up some money to take Keselowski. But
and he's on page 2. So
yes, he's on page 2. Sorry, I jumped to page 2
here.
But on page 1, let's see, page 1 here. Well, Keselowski, Joey Logano, wow.
But there's not much value there because they're both minus 110.
There's no value there. Just stay away from it.
And that's what I kind of look for is value, and I'm looking for plus numbers. So we'll flip over to page 2. You look over there, and I think you got a good point there with Kurt Busch. Kurt Busch also plus 110 against Ryan Blaney. I think there's a lot of love on Ryan Blaney because he won the Roval race at Charlotte last year. But I think everybody has to kind of remember that part of the reason he won the Roval was because Jimmy Johnson wrecked Martin Truex coming to the checkered flag, which was another road course that Martin Truex Jr. could have won. I mean, he could be sitting here right now holding the triple crown of road courses. He would have all 3 trophies if he doesn't run out of gas at Watkins Glen and Jimmy doesn't wreck him coming to the finish line in Charlotte. So I just think that Martin Truex Jr.'s dominance has been incredible there.
You've got me looking closely at Daniel Suarez, and that's on page 2. He's got a couple of matchups there against Kyle Larson, and he's minus 130, and against William Byron, and he's minus 130 there as well. And I've got taken parlay those two, put them together.
Well, maybe so, but it's just so little.
If they'll let you.
Yeah, but at minus 130, there's just so little value. You're not going to win a whole lot on him. I think the guys that are setting these odds and people that are putting their money down, I think they kind of get that Daniel Suarez is a guy who could really be in contention.
Yes, and so many things are critical for him this weekend in his performance there, finishing, as you mentioned, 4th last year. Kurt Busch. Oh, okay. Here you go. Kurt Busch, Ryan Blaney. Kurt is plus 110 in this race against Ryan Blaney, and there's some. I like some value there against Blaney and Kurt Busch and what he's been able to do over the years.
I really like that because I think part of the love for Ryan Blaney, like I mentioned, is because he won the Roval at Charlotte, but he sort of backed into it. So, all right, let's move on to the group matchups. Brendan and I talk a lot.
Okay, groups.
We have a lot more fun with the groups. Number one, you get longer odds on the groups, whereas in the head-to-head matchups, you're getting plus 110s, plus 115s, maybe a plus 120 or 130. But we get into the groups, and we got a lot bigger numbers. But the first thing that jumps off the page at me on the groups is that the guys setting the odds are they don't even want to put Kyle Busch and Martin Truex Jr. in a group. I mean, now to me, that's not fair. I mean, give the bettors something, right?
Yes.
It's like you give a guy a radar detector for his car, he gets a fighting chance. We should start giving the deer guns, I guess, right?
Yeah, please.
But I mean, come on now. I don't like the fact that we don't have Kyle Busch and Martin Truex Jr. in Group A. That being said, Denny Hamlin, hottest guy out there right now. Yeah. He's at a plus 250 alongside Chase Elliott. And then Kevin Harvick, plus 265. We got Clint Boyer also at plus 250, excuse me. Kevin Harvick is the long shot in that group at plus 265.
That's interesting, too. I don't know why Boyer's in there. Okay, I'll say this. I'm not sure why. Why not have Kyle Busch instead of Clint Boyer in that group?
Well, why not put Kyle Busch and Martin Truex Jr. somewhere in there? I mean, I don't know who you drop out because there's a lot of love on Chase Elliott because he's a defending champion of the race. But Chase Elliott has really been struggling for the last 6 weeks.
Yes.
I don't have a lot of confidence in Chase Elliott right now. He's going to have to prove something. All right, let's move on over to Group B. We got that one up on the screen right now, too. Kurt Busch is the long shot there at plus 280, but he's running against all 3 Penske cars. So do you take Kurt Busch against the 3 Penske cars at plus 280, or do you go after, you mentioned earlier, you really like Joey Logano.
Yes.
The guy who's run well at Watkins Glen has not run as well at Sonoma.
And he needs, well, he's number one in the points, so he doesn't need it for the point standings. But at the same time, this is a track that both he and Keselowski really love and really enjoy. So they're both plus 255. So put those two guys together, and that's a tough choice. I would do this. Okay, if you could place bets on both guys. There you go.
You can.
And I get that.
You've cut it in half on your chances to win.
Cut it in half
and your chances to lose. But you look at it either way.
But I do like both of those guys in this race, how they do on road courses, how they do at Watkins Glen in particular. So no, it's Group B. Group B is, I'll say this, Group B is more intriguing to me than Group A, and typically it's the other way around.
Well, and one thing I think everybody should look at when it comes to road course races, they are races that typically have different strategies. They have different fuel mileage runs, and the guys that are already in the playoffs, these guys want more playoff points. They have nothing to lose. So if you run out of gas with a lap to go and you're already in the playoffs, well, you're not losing your playoff spot. But if you stick it out and you stay out there on the track to try to win the race so that you can pick up those 5 bonus points going into the playoffs, that is way more important than what few points you might lose by not being there. So I think you got to look at the guys who've already clinched their playoffs. I think they are going to all be contenders to win this week because they're the ones that are going to be willing to roll the dice. All right, let's move along to Group C and Group D. Group C right now, kind of a little bit all over the board. Daniel Suarez, he is the favorite in that group. He's already been bet to plus 240. Judging by the lineup of the way the drivers are entered here, he probably was not the favorite when the lines were originally set. We see Eric Jones. Again, we talked about him. 3 straight top threes. He's at plus 260. Kyle Larson, a guy who's always run well at Watkins Glen, at plus 260. And the fact that Jimmy Johnson's in Group C really kind of surprises me at plus 285. I really, really, really love Suarez in that group right there.
I do too. I would take Suarez in that group. Larson finished 6th in this race last year, and you mentioned that he likes Watkins Glen and races well there, but Suarez finished 4th. So Suarez won that matchup head-to-head last year. So, yes, he's the choice there. Eric Jones would be an intriguing pick, and I think that's more a momentum pick with him. But momentum, and help me here with this, is momentum changes with the road course.
It changes a little bit, but I'll tell you what, I do believe that when you're running well as a driver, you're up on the wheel more. I think as a crew chief, you're more into it, and I think that's what we're seeing with Eric Jones right now.
Okay, yeah, and he's plus 260.
Now, Group D, one of the biggest numbers I've ever seen in a group, Eric Almirola. He's a good racer. I mean, I don't know that road courses are his forte, but he's such a heavy underdog at plus 350 there in Group D. And the other 3 guys that he's racing against in that group have far less experience than he does. I mean, William Byron, he's a second-year driver. Alex Bowman, he's been around for a little while, but he really hasn't been around that long. Doesn't really have a lot of road course data to go off of. Matt DiBenedetto, similar. And those 3 guys are heavy favorites over Eric Almirola. So if you're looking at taking a flyer on somebody that, I mean, what do you risk a buck to win 350?
Right.
Eric Almirola is a pretty good chance.
And good point. You talk about the experience there. He knows the court. Finished 22nd last year in the race, so he was. But against guys that have much less experience than he does, he needs this. Certainly ranked 9th in the point standing. He's not guaranteed of anything at this point. Doesn't have a win yet this year, so he's not guaranteed of anything. So his motivation is to get points out of this race and to do something. And I think in this place, when you have the group matchups, you want a driver that you talk about the fuel issues that you have is more pronounced on a road course because you have longer laps, and so you take chances more to try to win the race. He's not going to take a chance to try to win this race. I don't see him doing the same thing because he needs the points.
Other than Alex Bowman, nobody in that group is going to do that. William Byron's another guy.
Yeah.
Same situation as Almirola. Now, Matt DiBenedetto, he may look at it differently. If Matt DiBenedetto had a chance here, the only way Matt DiBenedetto is going to make the playoffs is if he wins a race. So he probably has a nothing to lose. So Bowman, nothing to lose because he wants playoff points because he's already in. Almirola, Byron, a lot to lose. DiBenedetto, nothing to lose. So maybe you kind of look at who's desperate and who's not. But I just like the fact that you got such big numbers on Almirola. All right,
big. Yeah.
Let's move on to our last 2 groups. We've got our Group E, and there's another group that is kind of all over the board. A really young driver in Daniel Hemrick, who's never raced a cup race at Watkins Glen, but he's one of the co-favorites along with Chris Buescher at plus 245. And then you got Paul Menard, a guy who has run a number of races at Watkins Glen, and Michael McDowell, who is actually proven to be a pretty good road course racer. Michael McDowell seems to do well at Daytona, Talladega, and does pretty well on road courses. And so Menard and McDowell being the long shots there, again, probably not bad to take a flyer on one of those 2 guys. And if you really think that Menard or McDowell will certainly finish ahead of Hemrick and Buescher, bet both of them. You still come out a winner as long as one of them wins the group.
Oh, yes. And with these, it is more interesting with the groups, I think, to pick them before qualifying. Now you're taking more of a chance. After qualifying, these numbers all change. They get adjusted obviously because of the qualifying. And there's major adjustments to these numbers after the qualifying. But Paul Menard, the veteran there who's been around for, who knows his way around these tracks and has raced for a long time. So, yeah, at plus 280, and McDowell, same thing, plus 280. But If you're chicken, go ahead and wait till after they qualify. But if you got some,
but there's no point.
Want to give it a shot? Go beforehand.
Well, you're right. Now the odds could certainly change.
They will change. Yeah.
And then the last one, our Group F, which we name in honor of Ron Flatter, our Group F.
There you go.
Ron gets to listen to our show and hear his name once a week this way. So, Ty Dillon, who is one of the actual more veterans out of that group, is the long shot there at plus 280. Yet Ryan Priest, David Reagan, another veteran, and Matt Tift, all at 255. You got two of your Rookie of the Year candidates in Ryan Priest and Matt Tift favored over Ty Dillon. I think, again, I really kind of like the long shot again there. I mean, Ty Dillon, the guy's been around for a little while. He's raced at Watkins Glen probably 3-4 times, and he's not in a horrible car against a couple of rookies. And David Reagan, who's pretty solid, does the same thing every week.
Ty Dillon finished 23rd last year in the race, so solid performance. Nothing to be embarrassed about.
And Ryan Priest and Matt Tift weren't even in the race last year.
Weren't even as rookies.
They haven't even raced there.
Yeah.
And David Reagan with a little bit of experience there. So I kind of tend to stay away from the lower groups. Brendan loves those because he loves betting on Chris Buescher, but we'll see.
Well, bless him. For having that sort of knowledge and knowing a lot more of the intricacies than I would certainly know. And I would stop after Group D and probably not go any further than there. If you took who to pick, just because Brendan knows so much more in that sense.
It certainly can be a roll of the dice. And speaking of how well we do on our picks, we'll come back on our final segment of Gone Racing. We'll talk about how we did last week. Our producer, Ann, not as good as she's been doing the last few weeks. We'll talk about that when we come back.
This is Gone Racing, the weekly NASCAR show that gets you ready for this week's big race and more. You can listen to VSiN on SiriusXM Channel 204. Watch us online at vsin.com and follow us on Twitter at VSiN Live.
VSiN last week. Here's some of what you missed.
How much in the terms of momentum or legs does the 18-game, 16 per player maximum have?
I can't imagine that Tom Brady's going to miss 2 games. I just can't fathom that you have a starting quarterback and you got to rest him for 2 games. And what that would look like is everybody would rest their quarterbacks first 2 weeks of the season and then play the rest of the year. I mean, why I'm not, or maybe rest them in week 17 when the game doesn't matter if you think you can get there. But it's either early or late, but you can't rest them in October or November. There's too much at stake.
So is that shaded a little bit shorter considering there's a lot of smart minds behind the Cornhuskers this year?
Well, let me give all the credit for all this college football stuff to Ed Salmons, our senior college football guy here at the Superbook. And I know Ed and I both really like Nebraska this season. Talk about a team that, as bad as they started, they closed out so well at the end of last year. Mm-hmm. And that's such a mark of a great coach. And Scott Frost did such a great job with Central Florida, and he really had that team turned around by the end of last season. I don't see any reason why Nebraska won't win the Big Ten. I think it's called the Big Ten West.
You got Zeke. You can't get into a 7-man box down there because they'll run it down your throat. So obviously, it's got to come off the passing game or some other way. Do they have an answer for it down there?
Yeah, Michael, they really, they really struggled, as you mentioned, with that. Some great numbers that you just threw out there. And, you're absolutely right. They missed a really point of attack blocker. They're tight end. They used to have a combination, even old man Jason Witten and then, James Hanna. When they had James Hanna, and then James Hanna retired, James Hanna was kind of a stunt man. He's like, okay, they take the actor out, they put the stunt man in, and, he does all the dirty work. And they missed a guy like that. They didn't have that ability to really control the point of attack.
I mean, what was your low? How bummed were you at that moment? Were you just super dejected, or were you okay with it?
It's a funny story. So when right after the taping finished, and I kind of had to go sign my forms to collect my second place money, one of the producers came up to me and she gave me a hug, and she actually started crying because she said she had never seen anyone play the game so beautifully before, and I had to pat her on the back and comfort her.
That's amazing.
The experience was ending.
Wow.
But I would say it was kind of a bittersweet moment. Obviously, I wasn't happy to lose, but at the same time, it was getting a little stressful. going back there every week, and I was kind of like I had put this achievement, checked it off the bucket list.
Defensively, this is a good football team. And Fangio will make them. They'll create some turnovers with his pressure and his way to, you got Von Miller on one side and Bradley Chubb on the other. That's going to be, and then you're playing an altitude up there. Look, they're 6-10 last year, and you and I watched it repeatedly at the Oceans, right? How many games did Vance Joseph mess up for him?
Yep, I would say off the top of my head 5.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we sat there and like, what are you doing? And I think if they just don't lose games. Belichick talks about this all the time. We have to avoid losing before we can win. And I thought last year Denver lost games more than any.
Welcome back to our weekly NASCAR show, live from the Sportsbook at the South Point Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. Now, back to Gone Racing.
Welcome back into our final segment, the one we like to call Banking It, here on Gone Racing. I'm Jeff Motley, alongside Ron Futrell. Brendan Gaughan's on vacation in lovely Ireland this time. A beautiful time of year to be in Ireland. They do everything over in the British Isles right now. They got the British Grand Prix. They had Wimbledon. They had the British Open, the Open Championship. It's a great time to be over there, and I think he missed all of it because I think all those events are over. You can go to the Women's British Opens this weekend, I think.
Is that over there as well? But it's real narrow window you have in Ireland. I live there, so I know it. I lived there for 2 years. So you have a very narrow window of when you have nice, fine, fun weather, and then the clouds come and it gets mucky in the winter months. But that's what it is.
Well, he'll have to enjoy it without us over there. So this is a segment where we like to talk about how we did last week, and we make our picks for the upcoming week. And just to recap last week a little bit, Brendan and I actually had good weeks. Brendan gained 3.9. He had winners with Eric Jones in the top 3. He got 4 points off that one, and Chris Buescher to win Group E. He got 2.9 points off that one. I picked up a plus 1.2 last week. I also had Chris Buescher at 2.9 to win his group, and had Kevin Harvick beating Kyle Busch, getting 1.3. Head up right there. Our producer, Ann, who is in first place and has a commanding lead in first place. Do not want to take that away from her. She decided to follow my lead from the previous week and put up a big old goose egg and went 0 for 5. But you are the leader, Ann, so it is your turn to make your picks. You get to go first. Fire away.
34/100ths of a second. That's it.
Hey,
34/100ths of a second.
That's about what you won with Kurt Busch at Kentucky.
It is.
So
I guess,
you get no sympathy from us.
But that would have been a nice lead if I had hit that one. I had Eric Jones to win last week, and that was tough. So this week, got to play a little more defensively, and on the top 3 finishes, I am going to take Martin Truex Jr. And I do love my Eric Jones. So I'm taking Eric Jones again in the top 3 because I believe I've won twice with him, picking him in the top 3. So, and next in Group A, I am picking Denny Hamlin to win Group A. And in Group B, Ryan Blaney at plus 255. And then I'm going down the line because who is in Group C?
There's your boy.
There he is.
There he is.
Eric Jones.
There he is. Eric Jones at plus 260. Those are my 5 picks.
Well, and the reason Ann's picking first is because on the season, Ann is at plus 36, an incredible number.
She's pounding you guys.
She got a plus 25 on Kurt Busch to win at Kentucky by about less than the 0.34 seconds or whatever Eric Jones lost by last week.
And a win is a win is a win is a win.
Yes.
Right? Am I right about that? Okay.
I'm in second at 5.8. So you see I got some making up to do. And before we get to his picks, Brendan, who did send his picks in this week, has moved up to minus 2.05. So he is getting close to getting in the plus. But let me go through my picks real quick this week. I usually don't pick race winners, but I am trying to find some value there. I'm going to go Joey Logano to win the race at 12-1. I am sticking on the Daniel Suarez to run well at Watkins Glen bandwagon at plus 500. I've got Daniel Suarez finishing in the top 3. The only head-to-head matchup I really, really liked, I'm going to go with Martin Truex Jr. at plus 115, head up against Kyle Busch. And then my other 2 picks are going to come out of the groups. I'm going to go with Joey Logano to win Group B at plus 255. And I'm going to go in Group C. I'm going with Daniel Suarez, kind of putting my eggs in the Daniel Suarez basket at plus 240. And since Brendan is not here, I have the.
You got his picks?
I have Brendan's picks. He did text them to me so that I could read them on air. So Brendan is going to take Michael McDowell to win Group E. Michael McDowell at plus 280. We talked earlier in the show about how Michael McDowell is a guy who does run well on road courses, has some good opportunities there. I think that's really a good pick for Brendan. I like that one. And then, strangely enough, I think Brendan is going to try to pick the top 3 in the race, because his next 3 bets are all top 3 finishers. He's going with Brad Keselowski at plus 375 to finish in the top 3. He's going with Kurt Busch at plus 400 to finish in the top 3. And he is joining me in jumping on the Daniel Suarez bandwagon, where he is going to take Daniel Suarez at a plus 500 to finish in the top 3. And then Brendan's final pick is he is going to go, and I think what he's trying to do is he is trying to catch Ann all at one time.
Oh, okay.
He is going to pick one of the hottest drivers on the circuit. He's taking Eric Jones at 30-1. 30-1 to win the race this weekend at Watkins Glen. So if Brendan gets that one, I will be a distant third and be way out of the money. But I think it's going to shape up to be a pretty exciting race this weekend at Watkins Glen. And I think the fact that we've got so few guys in the race who have won at Watkins Glen before, but we've seen 4 different winners in the last 4 races there. Unless Martin Truex Jr. really, or Kyle Busch, one just kind of checks out on the field, I think we've got a really good opportunity to have sort of a wild card race and maybe upset the apple cart a little bit this weekend.
Yeah, it's going to be fun, and I like Joey Logano and Brad Keselowski. Both of them are 12-1. That might be a look to throw money on both of those guys. I know it cuts your winnings and that sort of stuff, but the math on that right now. And again, as you advise and like to mention, sometimes it's best to wait till after qualifying it, especially on a road course, because it's so critical where you qualify.
And this is an impound race. So again, we're going to qualify, and then we're going to do tech on Sunday. And probably a road course may be the worst place, other than maybe, say, Martinsville or Bristol, where it's such a short track you can go a lap down so quickly. You do not want to fail inspection here on Sunday morning and have to start at the rear. Because starting at the rear of the field, you're either done or you're going to have to do some really creative strategy and then get really lucky and have a break fall your way. So that's one thing we like to encourage the bettors is wait until qualifying is done, and if it's an impound race like it is this week, wait until after tech is done on Sunday morning. I mean, last week, I think we had about 7 or 8 guys, including, I think it was Jimmy Johnson, one of them. Kyle Larson might have been one of them. I think Kyle had to go to a backup car, but Jimmy Johnson was one. I think some of these guys had to go to the rear because they had failed inspection at early in the day. And I think that that's become a story on a number of these impound races is guys that are failing inspection. And that's almost a disaster scenario for a lot of these guys.
Yeah, it indeed would be. By the way, Jeff, I do want to mention this. We're August 1st today. If my watch,
we are August 1st. If you're listening to the show today, now we also will be on August the 2nd, August the 3rd, and August the 4th on VSiN.
Either way, it certainly works for what I was going to say, because next month, that means the race is here in Vegas, middle of September next month. So you start breathing heavy and you got more stuff going on here. We're 3 weeks away from 6 weeks away from racing here in Vegas in the playoffs.
Well, you're right, and I think that's going to be the other big key after this week. I think this is the last wild card week we really have of the season, because to me, I look at Daytona, Talladega and the road courses are kind of the wild cards, that somebody who's 20th or 21st or 23rd in points could end up winning the race. Now, yeah, we could always get a situation like Justin Haley winning at Daytona because of the rain coming and somebody stayed out. But for the most part, this is the last wild card race, because after this, we've only got 4 races left before we set the final playoff field. We go to Michigan, we go to Bristol, we go to Darlington, and we go to Indianapolis. So 4 races left, and like I said, if you're those guys that are on the bubble, you're really starting to get nervous. And then everything for most of these guys is starting to point toward Las Vegas, the South Point 400. We're sitting right here in the South Point Hotel, and you said that's coming up on September, middle of September.
Middle of September.
So September 15th will be at that actual race, and kind of kicks off NASCAR's playoffs. So I think that's what you're going to see. Most of these guys are all kind of focused in on right now. It's just getting ready for Las Vegas and seeing how many bonus points can we build up. Because if you're Kyle Busch or you're Truex, those guys, you got to build up your bonus points.
I like the diversity of these next 3 weeks with having Watkins Glen, then the big 2-mile oval at Michigan, and then Bristol. You got that the mile track there just tears cars up. So the diversity the next 3 weeks is fascinating in NASCAR.
It is. I'm going to be at Bristol this year, so I'm going to kind of look forward to going to Bristol. Just want to let everybody know, Brendan will be back next week, but Brendan also has his fantasy show, Pete Pistone, this weekend. We'll see you next week on Gone Racing.
This is Gone Racing, the weekly NASCAR show that gets you ready for this week's big race and more. You can listen to VSiN on SiriusXM Channel 204. Watch us online at vsin.com and follow us on Twitter at VSiNLive.
If you didn't catch VSiN last week, here's some of what you missed.
How much in the terms of momentum or legs does the 18-game, 16 per player maximum have?
I can't imagine that Tom Brady's going to miss 2 games. I just can't fathom that you have a starting quarterback and you got to rest him for 2 games. And what that would look like is everybody would rest their quarterbacks first 2 weeks of the season and then play the rest of the year. I mean, why? I'm not, or maybe rest them in week 17 when the game doesn't matter if you think you can get there. But it's either early or late. But you can't rest them in October or November. There's too much at stake.